So for the male reproductive system, we actually went through all the major parts in the lab. I wouldn't repeat that, just want to remind you, right? So the function of the scrotum, why we have, the testes outside of the pelvic cavity, that's because for the sperm development and maturation, you actually need lower, cooler temperature than the body temperature. So the scrotum basically provides provide space for the testes to hang out of the pelvic cavity, right, for to provide this cooler environment. And the epididymis, right, so it's this structure like a comma shape that sits on top of the testes, stores the sperm until they are fully matured and capable of motility. So the sperm generation, the production of the sperm has the sperm, after sperm is produced, there is a maturation step for that for the sperms to go through. So the again, just like in the female reproductive system, the male reproductive system, right, sits in the pelvic cavity and is surrounded by other tissues, other organs. Like this is a urinary bladder, that's rectum, right? So you need to be able to distinguish them, those male reproductive system, especially for the lab exam, because it's all those organs, right? You have like the urinary system organs is here too, with the ureter, right, sticking out here, and don't confuse your ureter with the ductus deferens, right? That's the duct system that carries sperms from the epididymis to the urethral. So the urinary system and the reproductive system share a duct, right, going outside for the males, right? So there you have the ejaculatory duct, right, that merge with the prostatic urethra, right? So then you also have this small structure tends to be overlooked called the bulbourethral gland that secretes mucin and to lubricate the urethra for the sperm to go through, right? So that's homologous to the greater vestibular gland in the female reproductive system. The main function, of course, for the male reproductive system is also to produce gametes, that's sperms, right, and also produce the sex hormone, and that function is the function of testes. So in terms of the hormonal control of this process of spermatogenesis, right, the process of generating sperms, is also under the influence of the hormonal regulation, but it's a much simpler kind of process than the oogenesis that's regulated by the ovarian cycle. So because males do not have cycle, right, they constantly churning up their sperms at 100 million sperms per day, right? So then it's basically just regulated by a negative feedback system, right? So you have the upon after puberty, then you start to have the gonadotropin hormone. That's the one that start to be active during puberty, right? Upon puberty, then start to act on the anterior pituitary gland, releasing then FSH and LH, the same pituitary hormones from the female pituitary gland, right? Then it's going to act on two different type of cells in the testes. Those two kind of cells we actually talked about in the lab. So one is actually called sustentacular cells. that's actually in the seminiferous tubules that's in the testes, right? So in those seminiferous tubules, that's where there's generation of the sperm. So the sperm is going to be generated, then released, right? So into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. We're going to talk about that process. So the cells, tentacular cells are the supporting cells that supporting, those are bigger cells supporting the sperms, spermatogenesis. But they have another function, is to actually generate this androgen binding protein that stabilize androgen levels in the blood. They are not the ones that generating the sex hormone like androgens. Instead, the androgens are actually secreted by interstitial cells. That's the cells outside of the seminiferous tube. You see the border here, and those are the cells called interstitial cells. We also talk about it in the lab, and those are the cells generate testosterone, one type of androgen. So androgen binding hormone is going to bind to the androgen testosterone generated by the interstitial cells, right? And so that testosterone level, high testosterone so increased level of testosterone is going to put a inhibition effect on the hypothalamus and pituitary. So then it wouldn't, so the testosterone level is constant within the range. Testosterone also the one giving us libido, giving males libido. Libido, that's basically is a sex drive, right? So testosterone also is the hormone directly regulates spermatogenesis. So the negative feedback basically keeping the tentacular cells also secrete inhibin, also work on the hypothalamus and the pituitary, similar like what inhibin does in the female reproductive system, in the female endocrine system, right? So that's basically all those is basically keeping the testosterone within a certain range, right? If the testosterone level is low, then inhibition is low, then you end up having more stimulation from the gonadotropin hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the pituitary hormones that's going to generate more testosterone. And if testosterone level is high, it's going to turn off the upstream stimulation, then it's going to reduce the testosterone level, right? So then end result is the testosterone level is constant, it's constantly working, it's constantly generating sperms. So this is what happens in the seminiferous tube, right? You have seminiferous tubules. So you have the tentacular cells right here, the big cells, right? That's supporting the development of spermatogenesis, right? You have from the spermatogonium that's going to generate primary. So it's a sequence, the level, the sequence of events happening, you should be aware, right? You should be able to match, right? Put them into order, into a sequence, right? From the spermatogonium, you'll have, generate a primary spermatocyte, then the secondary spermatocyte, just like primary oocyte and secondary oocyte, right? Then from the secondary spermatocytes, that's going through another round of another phase of meiosis, as meiosis 2, then results in 4 daughter cells. Here, you'll really have 4 equal daughter cells. Then, like the oocytes, you only have generated 1 ovum, right? The others are polar bodies and is going to regress. Here, you really generate 4 spermatids, and those do not have tail, right? Then they need to be further mature and to become sperm, right? Spermatids and going to generate become during maturation, and going to actually become sperm. Sperm is going to release into the lumen of the seminiferous tube. And those are the structure of the sperm. So head, midpiece, and tail. So the nucleus is in the head. And on top of the nucleus, you have a acrosome cap, have the chemicals that can penetrate the zona lucida of the oocyte. So the sperm needs to be able to swim. So it also needs to have actually machinery to generate energy for it to move, right? So that's mitochondria. You have mitochondria packed into the middle piece, and you have the tail that facilitates the movement of the sperm. So those are the major components of the sperms. So the male reproductive system is optimized for generate millions of sperms, have them mature, and then have a way to release them to the outside. So the ductal system, duct system, and accessory glands all work towards that end, right? So the sperm is going to move from testis to the ductus or vas deferens to the ejacular ducts, right? Is at here ejacular ducts where you're actually also going to mix with the seminal fluid that generated from seminal vesicle, right? Seminal vesicle is also called seminal glands. And then, so you have the mixing of seminal fluid and the sperm here. And you also, then it's going to be released into the prostatic urethra, then move on, right? And here you also have another gland called bulbar urethral gland. Is going to release their secretion into the urethra. So that's how it's going to move on. Then going to exit from the external urethral orifice. So again, be able to put everything, the duct system in order, the sperm movement, right, travel from testis through which structures in order. That's going to be important for you for the exam. Here I want to say something about the accessory glands. There are 3 accessory glands here: seminal vesicle or seminal glands secrete alkaline fluid. That's a major one, make up of semen, right? Then that contain both the fructose that's providing energy source for the sperm, but also prostaglandin that helps the cervix open up and allow the sperms to go through in once they are in the female's body. So prostate gland also secretes some fluid, but then in addition to those two, bulbar urethral secretes mucin mainly, right? So the overall result is the seminal fluid predominantly is driven by this seminal fluid is alkaline. That's going to be needed to neutralize the acidity of the vagina, so then the sperm can survive the process. So let's have a look of the external genitalia of the male. So here you have the penis and scrotum, right? The lab focus a lot on the scrotum, like the structure, internal structure. Here I want to mention something about the penis. So penis, you have the glands of the penis that's sensitive, really sensitive, right? And they'll have the if you look at the cross-section of the body of the penis, right, you have the body of the penis, root of the penis, right? It's actually having those erectile, made up mainly of those erectile bodies or erectile tissues. They are not muscle, however. They are function as like a sponge, and when they're engorged in blood, it's going to stiff up. Where does the blood come from? The blood comes from the central artery. Can see here. So it's the erectile bodies there are 2 kinds. So you have corpus cavernosum. So you have the holes inside, like a caves, right? cavernosum, two of them superiorly, and then inferiorly you have a single corpus spongiosum. So basically they are all like sponge. You also have, so the spongy urethral is actually in the middle of the corpus spongiosum, right? So the erectile, both of those corpus, those are erectile bodies. They can erect if they're engorged in blood. And when how do they relax? Well, if they are engorged, right, it's actually they're going to depress the vein that drains them, so then it become further engorged in blood. So that's kind of how you have an interplay, right, between the blood flow and the erectile bodies. Well, for the male sexual response, it's also included. The first three phases are the same as in the female ones. So excitation phase, right, and the orgasm, and then the resolution phase. In addition to that, males have a refractory period, right? So that means within the refractory period, you cannot have another erection, right? So let's look at what regulates the male sexual response. So here you can see the excitation phase is regulated by parasympathetic stimulation, right? Describes the process when the blood enters the erectile bodies and fills this venous space, and then basically engorge the blood with engorge the erectile bodies with blood, and this is called erection. And so at the end of the so basically then the veins cannot drain the blood away and can only leave when the excitation ceases, right? At the end of the excitation phase, your heart, your blood pressure, and respiration rate all increases, right? So those are actually through sympathetic stimulation. So sympathetic stimulation actually increase heart rate, blood pressure, and all that, right? So then with the orgasm, right, then you have the ductus deferens move the sperms towards the urethra by peristalsis. So this is just like the peristalsis helps the oocytes move from the uterine, move down the uterine tubes into the uterus. Here, the movement of the sperm is also facilitated by the peristalsis. In the ductus deferens. Then you also have the help of the accessory glands, right? Secretes all those fluid and forms semen. And then you have the ejaculation, that the semen is mixed with the seminal fluid, and the sperms are mixed and ejaculated, right? Through the contractions of the urethral wall. And so here, sympathetic innervation is responsible for ejaculation. So taken together, you need also the cooperation and the synergistic reaction of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions together for the male to achieve the sexual response. Right? So that's what I want you to remember. They do not, in the reproductive system, they do not opposing each other. They actually work synergistically to achieve the goal. Then after the ejaculation marks the end of marks the organism, and also then start the resolution phase. Then the intense relaxation, then the penis becomes soft again because the sympathetic stimulation then stimulates the artery contraction, and then so the venous blood can return. And you enter then the refractory phase for the males. And that's all for today. Just remember the 4 steps, right, for male response, and 3 steps for female. because females do not have refractory period. Similarly, the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions have to work together to achieve this. And lastly, female penis is not the erection is not caused by muscle contraction, right? It's actually the erection of the erectile body that's actually under the control of the parasympathetic and sympathetic division.